Chapter 3. Through the Veil. The air shimmered as Liora stepped forward, her foot hesitating just before crossing the glowing edge of the portal. The swirling light that had once consumed her room was now a thin, undulating veil, its surface rippling like water disturbed by an unseen hand. It was beautiful and unnerving, a fragile barrier between her world and something infinitely larger. Her breath caught as she stepped through. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. The air changed, thick and electric, carrying the scent of jasmine and ozone. It hummed faintly, alive with a latent magic that brushed against her skin like a living thing. Liora staggered slightly, her hand instinctively reaching out to steady herself, but there was nothing to hold on to. When she straightened, her eyes widened, and the words she'd planned to say dissolved into silence. The Arcanum Realms stretched out before her. Above her, the sky was an endless expanse of swirling violet and gold, the colors shifting and blending as though painted by an unseen artist's hand. Stars glittered faintly, forming constellations that seemed to move, rearranging themselves into patterns she didn't recognize. The ground beneath her feet glowed softly with pulsating runes, their light flowing in rhythmic waves that resonated faintly in her chest. Around her, towering crystalline trees stretched toward the sky, their branches refracting the light into cascading rainbows that danced across the forest floor. "This place," she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. "It feels like a dream." The faint hum of the portal faded behind her, replaced by the melodic whispers of the wind. It carried echoes of distant voices, their words indistinct but soothing, like a lullaby sung to the stars. She took a tentative step forward, her boots crunching softly against the glowing moss that carpeted the forest floor. The bioluminescent plants shifted under her weight, their light flickering like fireflies in the night. But with each step, the beauty of the realm was tempered by a growing unease. In the corner of her vision, something moved, a shadow darting between the trees, too quick to follow. The whispering wind grew sharper, carrying a faint edge of tension, as though the realm itself was holding its breath. Liora turned slowly, her heart pounding. The serene landscape now felt too quiet, the stillness heavy and expectant. "What is this place?" she murmured, clutching the key tightly in her hand. Its faint pulse steadied her, a reassuring reminder of the connection she couldn't yet explain. A rustle came from the trees to her right. She froze, her pulse quickening as her gaze locked onto the shadows. The silence stretched, oppressive and unbroken. Then, with a low, rumbling growl, the shadows moved. Liora moved cautiously, her boots sinking slightly into the spongy, bioluminescent moss. The faint glow it emitted cast an eerie, shifting light on the crystalline trees around her. The air felt heavier now, the electric hum of latent magic thrumming faintly in her ears. Despite the beauty of the Arcanum Realms, a knot of unease coiled in her stomach. The stillness was too perfect, the silence stretching like a taut wire ready to snap. A faint rustling came from her left. She froze, her breath catching as her eyes darted toward the sound. For a moment there was nothing, just the faint sway of the crystalline branches overhead. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she caught movement. A shadow darting between the trees, quick and deliberate. Liora tightened her grip on the key, its cool surface grounding her. "It's just an animal," she whispered to herself, though her voice sounded hollow. Maybe even part of the magic here. She forced herself to take another step forward, but the rustling grew louder, accompanied by a low, rumbling growl that vibrated through the air. Her heart pounded as she turned slowly, her eyes scanning the shadows. The growl came again, deeper this time, a mix of thunder and static that sent a shiver down her spine. And then it emerged. The beast stepped out from behind a tree, its massive form shrouded in the faint glow of the moss. It was wolf-like but larger, its sleek fur shimmering like liquid silver under the bioluminescent light. Amber eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, locking onto her with predatory focus. Its claws, long and curved, sparked faintly as they scraped against the ground. Liora froze, her breath caught in her throat. For a moment she dared to hope that it might not be hostile. Perhaps it was just another strange, magical creature, curious about her presence. But then the beast bared its fangs, a low snarl rumbling deep in its throat. The smell of charred wood filled the air, sharp and acrid, as if the beast carried the remnants of a forest fire in its breath. Liora took a step back, her foot catching on a root. "Easy," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I'm not here to hurt you." The beast growled louder, its amber eyes narrowing. It crouched low, its muscles coiling with dangerous intent. Leora's heart slammed against her ribs as the realization hit her. It wasn't curious, it was hunting. The beast lunged. She stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws. The creature hit the ground where she'd stood a moment before, its claws gouging deep marks into the moss. Leora scrambled to her feet, panic surging through her veins. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but the beast was faster. She bolted anyway, weaving between the crystalline trees as her breath came in ragged gasps. The sound of its pursuit was deafening. Each thundering footfall, each guttural growl, sent shockwaves of fear coursing through her. The ground shifted beneath her, and she tripped, falling hard onto her hands and knees. Pain shot through her palm as a jagged rock sliced into her skin. She cried out, clutching her bleeding hand to her chest as she scrambled backward, her eyes wide with terror. The beast emerged from the shadows, its growl rumbling like an earthquake. Its glowing eyes locked onto hers, and it stepped closer, its claws sparking with raw energy. "I can't die here," Leora thought desperately, her breath hitching. "Not like this. Not before I understand what this all means." Her hand brushed against a fallen branch and she grabbed it, holding it out in front of her like a makeshift weapon. The beast paused, its gaze flickering to the stick before returning to her. Leora's hands shook as she tightened her grip. "Stay back," she shouted, though her voice betrayed her fear. The beast snarled and lunged again. Leora swung the branch with all her strength, striking the creature's side. It yelped, more out of surprise than pain, and recoiled slightly. But it wasn't enough. The beast recovered quickly, its growl deeper and more menacing than before. It circled her, its movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the moment. Leora's chest heaved, her mind racing for a way out. But she was outmatched, and the realization settled over her like a crushing weight. The beast lunged a third time, and she closed her eyes, bracing for the impact. A blinding flash of light exploded in front of her, followed by a deafening crack. The beast let out a startled roar, its amber eyes narrowing against the brilliance. Leora opened her eyes, blinking against the sudden brightness. The air shimmered with golden dust, the light bending and refracting like a prism. The beast snarled, its claws raking the ground as it tried to regain its focus, but the shimmering light expanded, forming cascading illusions that danced around it, confusing and disorienting. "What the?" Leora began, but her voice trailed off as the illusions took shape. Figures emerged from the golden dust, phantom wolves, larger and more menacing than the beast itself. They snarled and lunged, their forms dissolving into sparks just before they struck. The beast roared in frustration, its movements frantic as it swiped at the mirages. But no matter how many it struck down, more appeared, circling it like a pack of ethereal predators. Leora stared, her fear momentarily giving way to awe. The illusions were stunning, their movements so fluid and lifelike that they could have been real. The beast growled one last time before retreating into the shadows, its glowing eyes glaring at her as it disappeared into the darkness. The golden dust lingered for a moment longer, swirling gently before dissipating into the air. Leora remained frozen, her chest heaving as she tried to process what had just happened. "Are you always this bad at staying alive?" The voice came from behind her, smooth and laced with sarcasm. Leora spun around, her eyes narrowing as she tried to identify the speaker. A figure stepped forward, his silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the runes on the forest floor. He wore a long coat adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer, like the illusions that had saved her. His green eyes sparkled with amusement as he looked her over, one eyebrow raised. Leora's grip on the stick tightened. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. The man grinned, his expression infuriatingly casual. "Let's just say you're lucky I came along." He extended a hand toward her, his movements deliberate. "Elias," he said, "and you are?" Liora hesitated, her gaze flickering to the shadows where the beast had vanished. "Alive for now," she said, brushing past his outstretched hand. Elias chuckled, his eyes glinting with approval. "Fair enough," he said, "but if you're planning on surviving this place, you might want to rethink your strategy." The golden dust hung in the air like fireflies caught mid-flight, glittering faintly as it drifted downward before vanishing into the moss-covered ground. Liora clutched the stick tighter, her chest heaving as she scanned the space where the beast had been. Only silence greeted her now, save for the soft hum of the glowing runes beneath her feet. "Are you always this bad at staying alive?" The voice came from behind her, smooth and faintly amused. Liora spun around, nearly stumbling in her haste. A man stood a few steps away, his silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the runes. He was tall, his figure lean and angular, with a coat that seemed to ripple and shift as though the patterns on it were alive. Golden flecks of magic still clung to his outstretched hand, dissolving as he lowered it. His sharp green eyes locked onto hers, flickering with something that hovered between amusement and scrutiny. "What was that thing?" Liora demanded, her voice still breathless from the encounter. "It almost killed me." The man arched an eyebrow, his lips curving into a grin. "It still might," he said casually. "You're lucky I came along, or unlucky, depending on how you look at it." Liora straightened, gripping the stick like a sword. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone sharper now. He held up his hands in mock surrender. "Elias," he said simply. "And you are?" She hesitated, her gaze flickering to the shadows where the beast had disappeared. Her mind raced, torn between relief at no longer being alone and wariness of this stranger who seemed entirely too comfortable in a place like this. "Liora," she said finally, keeping her voice guarded. "Well, Liora," Elias said, his grin widening, "let me give you some free advice. Wandering around the Arcanum Realms without a clue what you're doing, not the best survival strategy." Liora glared at him, heat rising in her chest that had nothing to do with the beast or the magic still lingering in the air. "I didn't exactly plan this," she shot back. "One minute I was in my room, and the next, I was here." At that, Elias's grin faltered. His gaze dropped briefly to the key in her hand, his expression unreadable. "That explains a lot," he murmured, almost to himself. Liora caught the shift in his tone and tightened her grip on the key. "What do you mean?" she asked. Elias shrugged, his casual demeanor returning as quickly as it had slipped. "Just that you're either incredibly lucky or incredibly cursed," he said. "Maybe both." The response only fueled her frustration. "Why is this place so dangerous?" she demanded. "And why do I feel like I'm supposed to be here?" Elias's expression darkened slightly, though his tone remained light. "The Arcanum Realms are no place for the untrained or the uninvited," he said, his voice tinged with something she couldn't quite place. "You've got both going against you." Liora opened her mouth to argue, but the words caught in her throat. She glanced around at the glowing forest, the crystalline trees casting fragmented light on the bioluminescent ground. The beauty of the place was undeniable, but so was its danger. And yet, something deep within her refused to turn back. "I'm not leaving," she said firmly. Elias's eyebrows rose, the amusement returning to his eyes. "Oh?" he said, folding his arms. "And how exactly do you plan to survive? Let me guess, more sticks." Liora glared at him, her grip tightening on the makeshift weapon. "I don't need your help," she said, though even she could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Elias chuckled, shaking his head. "Well, you've got spirit, I'll give you that," he said. He stepped closer, his coat rippling faintly as he moved. "But spirit won't get you far here, not without someone to show you the ropes." Liora hesitated, her defiance wavering. She hated the idea of relying on a stranger, especially one as infuriating as Elias. But the memory of the beast's glowing eyes and snarling fangs was still fresh in her mind. Finally, she sighed. "Fine," she said, her voice begrudging, "if you're offering." Elias smirked, his green eyes glinting. "Oh, I'm not offering," he said. "I'm just too curious to let you get eaten. Yet." Before she could respond, a distant growl echoed through the forest. The sound sent a shiver down her spine, and she glanced toward the shadows, her heart racing again. Elias followed her gaze, his expression turning serious. "We should move," he said, his tone suddenly all business. "This place gets worse after dark." He turned, gesturing for her to follow, and started walking toward the faint outline of a glowing city on the horizon. Liora hesitated for a moment, her grip on the key tightening. She glanced one last time at the shadows where the beast had vanished, then hurried after him. As they walked, the forest seemed to grow darker, the bioluminescent plants dimming slightly, as if the light itself was retreating. Elias glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "This is going to be more trouble than it's worth," he muttered under his breath, though Liora caught the faintest trace of a grin on his lips. The forest grew darker with each step, the bioluminescent plants dimming as though the magic that illuminated them was retreating into the shadows. Liora glanced over her shoulder, her grip tightening on the key. The faint growl she'd heard earlier still echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of how close she'd come to death. Beside her, Elias moved with an ease that bordered on arrogance, his long coat shifting like liquid shadow with each step. He didn't glance back at her, but his sharp green eyes scanned the path ahead, his casual demeanor failing to mask the tension in his posture. "Do you always talk to strange girls in forests?" Liora asked, her voice cutting through the uneasy quiet. Elias chuckled softly, though the sound didn't carry its usual humor. "Only the ones who look like they're about to get themselves killed," he said. Liora rolled her eyes, the faint spark of irritation pushing back her lingering fear. "Thanks for the vote of confidence," she muttered. Elias slowed his pace, glancing back at her with a grin that was both teasing and knowing. "You're still breathing, aren't you? That's got to count for something." The faint sound of rustling leaves pulled their attention back to the shadows. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the oppressive silence settling over them again. Liora swallowed hard, her gaze flickering between the darkened trees. "You said this place gets worse after dark," she said, her voice low. "What did you mean?" Elias stopped walking, his expression hardening as he turned to face her. "The Arcanum Realms aren't kind to wanderers," he said, his tone losing its playful edge, "especially ones who don't belong." Something in his words stung, but Liora refused to let it show. "I'm here, aren't I?" she said, lifting the key slightly. "That has to mean something." Elias's eyes dropped to the key, and for a fleeting moment his expression faltered. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the same sardonic smirk she'd already come to expect. "Maybe," he said, his voice laced with a cryptic edge. "Or maybe it just means you're in over your head." The tension between them was palpable, but Liora refused to back down. She clenched her jaw and squared her shoulders, the fear and uncertainty she'd been carrying since stepping into this world burning into something closer to defiance. "Then I guess I'll have to figure it out," she said. Elias studied her for a moment, his green eyes searching hers. Whatever he saw there seemed to amuse him, because he let out a low chuckle and turned away. "This is going to be more trouble than it's worth," he muttered under his breath, though not so quietly that she couldn't hear it. They walked in silence for a while, the forest giving way to a wide expanse of open land. The ground here glowed faintly with runes that pulsed like a heartbeat, their light growing stronger as they approached a distant, glowing city on the horizon. The city rose like a mirage, its towers shimmering with golden light that flickered and danced as though alive. Floating platforms drifted lazily in the sky above it, connected by shimmering bridges of pure magic. Even from a distance, the hum of energy radiating from it was palpable, vibrating faintly in Liora's chest. She slowed her pace, her eyes widening as she took it all in. "What is that place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias stopped beside her, following her gaze. "Sanctuary," he said simply. But there was something in his tone, something that hinted at a deeper meaning or perhaps a memory he wasn't ready to share. As they stood there, the faint growl of the beast echoed again in the distance. Liora stiffened, her hand instinctively tightening around the key. Elias's expression darkened. "We should keep moving," he said, his voice low. Without waiting for her response, he started walking again, his long strides cutting through the glowing runes like a shadow passing through light. Liora hesitated for only a moment before following him, the weight of the key in her hand a constant reminder of the path she had chosen, or perhaps the path that had chosen her. The city loomed closer with every step, its golden glow casting long shadows across the darkening landscape. The Arcanum Realms were vast and dangerous, and Liora knew she had only begun to scratch the surface of their mysteries. But as the whispers of the wind carried through the night and the city's light reflected in her eyes, one thing became clear. She couldn't turn back now. The city promised answers, but the darkening landscape whispered of trials yet to come.